Bonjour à
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here in spite of the heat that we're having for the rencontre in Aix. Please take a seat. Thank you for those following us online. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that is preoccupying for France and its social model. It's the idea of building a full employment society. We've got some speakers with us today who are prestigious. Now, Stefano SCARPETTA was unable to come, unfortunately, this year. So anyway, we're going to ask the question, is full employment a mirage? And what can we say about this subject, given our unemployment rate between 7 to 10%? With us, I have lots of great people. I've got Stéphane CARCILLO, who is a member of the Cercle. He's a director of the employment and income at the OECD. Then we have François HOMMERIL, who is a union representative, so for managers, but not just for managers. Alongside him, we have Christelle MORANÇAIS, who is president of the Regional Council for the Pays de la Loire region. We also have Benoît DERIGNY, who is the CEO of ManpowerGroup. Of course, we all know who Manpower is. And then just next to me, there is Arnaud GANGLOFF. You head CAIA. CAIA is the first consultancy for general managers in terms of strategy and consumption. So perhaps we can start by looking at the situation. It's always good to see what we have. And so I'm going to hand over to Stéphane for this. Thank you, Fanny. Yes. There are lots of questions with respect to this debate. I'll start by trying to define what full employment is, this holy grail that we're striving towards. Now, there's no set definition or specific definition. We often think that it's an employment rate that's close to 5%, but in OECD countries, we don't really have that much unemployment. We've got some countries that are above 5%, and that includes France, but most of them are below at 3.5%. So the labor market is really quite in tension. So that gives us an idea. The second definition of full employment is the employment rate, the percentage of people who could be working, who do work. Now, from that point of view, France has made a lot of progress, but we're close to 69% full employment. That's the biggest rate measured by INSEE, but it's 10 points below Germany. And if we want to reach Germany's rate, we'd have to create between 3 and 4 million jobs. So if you define full employment as an indicator that based on employment rate, well, that's quite a considerable indicator. The second question that I'd like to ask is, why is it important to have full employment? You know, is it really a priority? Well, it's important from different points of view. It's important for social cohesiveness. For example, full employment defines what people do in their life. It structures them. It makes it possible to include a lot of people in society. So employment is really very important for social cohesion. It's also very important for collective wealth. The GDP per head depends a lot on the number of people who are employed. And finally, it's also important for public finances. If we had Germany's employment rate, we'd have over 100 billion extra income in the coffers of the state. So that's important as well. It's also important from a social and economic point of view to have full employment, and from a financial point of view. So I'm now going to ask a number of questions. So France has introduced different structural reforms, and that's why we've had an increase in the employment rate recently. We've introduced reforms onto the labor costs. We've carried out reforms for inciting people to go back to work. We created France Travail to get rid of any obstacles around employment. We focused on apprenticeships, so we've created individual training accounts, we've put back money into the education system. So we have the impression that we've done an awful lot of reforms for employment. But so why are we not yet in full employment with all of these reforms that have been introduced over the past 15 years? What should the strategy be? What more should be done? What should be the strategy for the next 10 years? What must we focus on? Now, to dig deep into this question, should we be removing obstacles at corporate level in order to create jobs? What are those obstacles? Should we be removing obstacles when it comes to employees and workers? And what are those obstacles? They're not just financial. They might be non-monetary obstacles as well. So these are some of the questions that we're going to try and answer today. So perhaps, Stéphane, we can just talk about why France, you mentioned it, but why France is so different from other countries in terms of rates. You were saying that in other countries they were at full employment. Is it a French exception? No, it's not a French exception. But there are some countries, and notably in the Mediterranean basin, that have full employment and that are seeing the same thing as in France. There are two subjects for France. France is quite good when it comes to including people between the ages of 25 and 50 years in the labour market. So there the full employment is comparable to that of Denmark. So there we're doing really well. So France is good when it comes to gender equality, not necessarily income, but on sharing the labour market. When we look at the difference between France and other countries, notably with Germany, we're in a much better position. So the problem is at the two ends of active life among young people and senior members of the society. For young people, we've got a difference of 20 points with respect to Germany. So for 15 to 25, we're at 55% in Germany. For senior members over 60s, the employment rate has gone up an awful lot. Following the pension reforms, we've gone up to 40% in Germany, where it's 60% for those over 60s. So these are the groups where we're seeing the biggest deficit. The last groups are, they're the groups of unqualified people who are fairly excluded from the labour market. And then there are people on long-term unemployment, and things haven't improved there. And then there are people who are not very well qualified. We often hear that in France that people don't want to work. François HOMMERIL, you represent employees. In France, is there an exception? Do people have a different relationship with work? Does it take them longer to go back to work because they're not really looking to go back to work? Well, hello. Well, all of this, it's part of our imagination. So there's a positive change in employment in France. And it's based on the economic climate. Other countries in Europe and in the OECD have seen this similar improvements. And all of the reforms done, labor laws, etc., things that have contributed to make people's life more difficult in terms of employment, organizing economic competition against social competition, that's not had more impact here than in other countries. So let me talk about the difference with Germany. So the reforms were introduced in Germany 15 years ago, developing low-value jobs, and that also has an effect on the difference. And I won't talk about vocational training, which costs an awful lot of money for a very mediocre economic value. Now, I want to really dismantle something that everybody thinks, left-wing and right-wing. They all think that because we have an unemployment scheme, that people are not motivated to go back to work. That is just a lie, the biggest lie that we've had for 15 years. And we're hearing it all the time. It's a lie that is scientifically has scientifically been contradicted. Now, there are two things behind this. Today, between 5 and 6 million people are job seekers, and 2 million only are receiving unemployment. So this has nothing to do with the wish to go back to work. Now, there are studies that exist. Bruno Coquet, he's a researcher at the UFCE. He's one of the experts in this area. And he has figures to show that there is this, there's the value of the number of people who don't want to go back to work because they have money from the state. It's less than 10%. So the unemployment system is very different compared with other systems in Europe. It's financed based on the social cost paid by employees. It's not an obstacle to going back to work. It's been proven. There are obstacles, different obstacles. So social mobility, geographic mobility. And I think it's important at the beginning of this debate to remember all of that. So geographic mobility, it is difficult in France to organize it. This is one of the obstacles. Now, Christelle MORANÇAIS, you are the only elected official on this panel. So you head a very big region. How can we get people to come and work? What are your keys? How do you work on your catchment area to bring down the unemployment rate? Hello, everybody. So at the head of the most beautiful region of France. So let me just make an introductory speech before I answer and come back to what you've said. There's a major stake in France, major challenge, and that is to put the value of work back into the heart of our debate. This is essential. It needs to be underlined. Today, working for employees, the cost of, you need to earn more going out to work than staying at home. And I think that social benefits shouldn't be higher than that. So this is a radical thing to say, but it's important to underline it. But so it's the debate about the cost of labor. And that's what we're hearing about a lot. And then there's another challenge. There's the challenge of, unemployment rates. Today, the unemployment rate in France, well, unemployment covers a too long a period. There should be different periods. Longer periods where you receive unemployment, when you're on a difficult labor market, it needs to be reduced. So there are taboos about this question. So the COVID period, let's take the COVID period. It didn't help us. Think about caterers today. It's very difficult for them to take people on. People don't want to work at the weekends anymore. You also have the 35-hour week in France, where the country where we work the least. Now, we must remember that before distributing wealth, we need to try and produce it. And this means work. Our social model is based on work. In my region, I turned the tables 3 years ago. So we organized training for job seekers, qualifying training leading to employment. And the return to employment was 60%. So we had the best rate at national level. I had a region where the unemployment rate is the smallest in France. There isn't one day when business heads don't call me and tell me about how difficult it is to recruit people. When you have so much tension, it was important to act. So we set up a new model for training, because training organizations have a lot of money. Well, there's a lot of money that is invested in them by the state or others, but that has to be useful for the job market. So we need to start with the needs of companies and then train according to those needs, not just send people to training organizations. So their clients today are no longer the region, even if we're financing. Their clients are business heads. So it's important to point that out. And then there's another drive that's very important, and you mentioned that with the unemployment rate of young people. It's initial training. A reform was introduced, and that was the reform of professional high schools, vocational high schools. You haven't got the academic world and the economic world on the other. We have to have more links between the two. It's important to set up training that is in line with the needs of companies. Let's stop training young people for no reason. We've got to focus on the value of jobs. So we've got to drop or revise the cost of labor and speed things up when it comes to vocational training or other training. What do employers think about this? You are the link between employers and employees. What are you seeing? Tell me about the value of work. Has it disappeared? Do people no longer want to work at the weekend or have abnormal working hours? Or are the heads of business outfaced by the expectations of employees? What are you seeing? Thank you. Hello, everybody. So what we're seeing are three things. There's a conviction, and there are two questions relating to our activities. The first observation is that, and we're seeing it this year, when you have a GDP that is frozen, I think it's 1.5 for 2025. We're used to seeing an unemployment rate that goes up, but this has not been the case. It's at 7.5, but it'll be at 7.7 by the end of the year. So that tells us about the structural modifications of the labour market. The second observation is that when you look at demographics, we look at the medium term, and we're looking at a shortage of talent for the future. In 2023, 6 million people over 65 years of age. In 2050, that we'll be looking at 12 million. So that really does tell us about the structural nature of the market. And the third observation that I'd like to share with you is that full employment is something that we already know to a certain extent. And because we know it geographically in a certain number of areas, if you take different counties, in the first half of the year, 27 have an unemployment rate below 26%. Others have over 10%, and there are 10 of these. So there are areas in France, and you mentioned this, where in reality, full employment, well, we're seeing it already. And there are situations that are close to full employment for certain jobs or sectors. You mentioned catering, the hotel sector. So there is the care industry as well, and industrial qualified jobs, you know, welders, boilermakers, etc. But things are not going to improve. It's the same thing for the construction sector. Qualified jobs in construction, in building, these are jobs where, in reality, we're already familiar with full employment. So our conviction is that we're moving towards a full employment society. Now, the real question is, at what speed? And that's something that we can act on. The subject of geographic mobility, you mentioned this as well. I'd just like to take two examples. If you take the unemployment rate for Brittany, it's 7.3 for Carré. Vitry, it's 4. Between the two cities, I checked it this morning on the Via Michelin, it's 2 hours, 2.5 hours by car. So the next question is the cost of housing. In Carré, it's 1,300 euros per square meter. In Vitry, it's 2,500 euros per square meter if you want to buy. So you can live in one place and work in the other, possibly. The second determining factor is the attractiveness of certain jobs. Now, that's where we need to focus on training. We don't have enough applicants or candidates. So we're moving towards a full employment society. We need to prepare for that. That's telling us things about the future. But at what speed are we going to head towards that future? So tell us if you're seeing the same thing. You're focusing on a certain, even if it's for a certain type of job. Do you have full employment? Yes, we're seeing full employment. We're also seeing it among a certain number of our clients. There are concerns when it comes to senior members of society. 30% of over 55s in 5 years' time is what we're seeing. So there are needs of companies, but there are also the needs of the population. It's important to converge the needs of the population who are a bit fed up of certain jobs, and then there's the absence of back office jobs, where we need to shine a light on that. So there are subjects that were not very present that are coming back on the table. And the talent and skills of senior members of society have become a hot topic. Now, the organization where I work looks at an elephant in the room, and that is artificial intelligence. So it's that what is good is to have full employment, but full employment that is good. So we don't know where we're heading towards. I don't know whether what Philippe will say. It's 18 and 68% of the population who might be affected. So there's a lot of anxiety with respect to this figures. So are some jobs going to be axed? When we don't adhere to that vision, we believe that 25% of jobs will be affected. And that brings us back to the conversions and training. We can come back to that. But what seems to be interesting for us is how we can, via AI, create some kind of hybridization and enrich jobs. Are the jobs that you can cite already? Well, yes, in X, this is what we're seeing. We've got a first revolution that's going to affect white-collar workers. There are lots of people who are explaining to me that being a consultant, that's a job that's going to be impacted. Some people are saying that 20% of young consultants will see their jobs disappearing. So young consultants are. So it's important to think about what what purpose they're serving. So it's about analyzing. So if we can help them to be more efficient, be more relevant, then obviously they're going to have a future. So there are many AI tools that can help them to be more efficient. Now, the good news is that if they save 15 to 20% of their time, they can spend more time with their clients. Our focus is how to transform things. And consultants help with teamwork. They help with change. Our consultants are the first agents of change in any company. So I think that it's more a benefit to look at this from the point of view of hybridization than talking about added value. So I fight against the idea of automation and destruction from AI. I like to think of hybridization, but there is something that we need to think about, and that is tacit skills and the ability to enjoy work. That's something that we need to look out for. As Charlie Chaplin said in Modern Times, I'm looking, and we've got to create value at work and economic factors that we've already heard about from other speakers. The value of work, it's about producing the expected results, but I think there's another value that's essential, and that is drawing pleasure from the job that we do. I think that it's the role of business heads to look at that value from that double point of view. Did you want to react to François HOMMERIL about drawing pleasure from work? Yes, we talked about working on Sunday. Nobody works on a Sunday out of pleasure. We agree with that, right? Why would you work on Sunday? Well, because it's better paid. It's quite simple. So we can talk about the value of work, but what about how it is actually paid for? So there's the cost of labor. So Stéphane, do you want to say something about the cost of labor in France? Because this seems to be a point of an obstacle to employment. Is it something specific to France, the cost of labor? I don't think that that's the real problem in France. The cost of labor, it's a problem for people who are not very well qualified. And France has really pulled out all the stops in terms of doing things for these with the different contracts, different pacts. We're at 80 billion in terms of public aid. In fact, we don't think about things in a targeted enough way. Now, training, initial training and further training and the needs of companies need to all be in line with each other. In OECD surveys, one that we do that's called the PIAC, that looks at the skills of adults, that shows that the level of skills is going down in France in terms of understanding tech, in terms of solving problems, in a digital context, for example, skills are going down. So this is a really important subject to be able to involve senior members of society. They have to be able to change jobs. And we've got the lowest training rate for senior members of society in France than in other countries, and compared with other age groups. So we're among the lowest. It's 60% in Norway, 60% in the United States. So we really need to think about adult training. It's not a problem of resources, it's a problem of method. So when it comes to resources for training, you know, we spend an awful lot of money, public money and private money. When you bring the two together, we're talking about 35 billion. So that's almost as much as the budget for higher education and research. So it's a problem of method, of the way we do things, and it's a problem of targeting. It's the same thing for young people. Let me just finish with this, because the problem is really the same with young people. We've got an increase in the number of young people in the PISA survey. So young people who are not good at reading, solving maths problems. And a new fact for France is that we're seeing a drop in the highest performing. The educational system is seeing dropouts. So we had a lot of loss at the bottom of the ladder, lots of young people dropping out, but we were generating young people with a higher performance, but that higher performance group is also seeing a decline. So it's important to really refocus on initial training. So we've got to focus on dropouts and make sure that they don't drop out. Apprenticeships, that's also important. It's important to recalibrate. But what are we doing with vocational training students? Well, we've got to make sure that there are more links with companies. So I'd like to say that if there's one thing that we need to focus on today, that it's not so much the question of the cost of labor or incentives for people to go back to work. We can maybe talk about that. But for me, the most important thing is access to training, to skills among young people and senior members of society. These are the two groups where in France there's a big difference. And that explains why we're not reaching full employment.
Christelle MORANÇAIS, did you want to respond to what's been said? Because with regards to training, you said we've put in place a new model, both for recruitment and for training. You said we needed to do something. Yes, I'd like to respond to what's just been said. I completely agree. There is access to training today, but we need to make it a lot more higher profile and more operational. The French system is that everyone gets involved, the national government, the regional governments, the employment centres. There's a whole bunch of different stakeholders, and that means the training offer is very hard to understand. With respect to initial training, particularly for young people, we need to completely reinvent our model. Vocational training, whether we're talking about apprenticeships or vocational schools, it's undervalued in France. Success for young people is considered to be academic training. It's not changed. We've seen vocational training increase, but not at pre-18 level, but a post-18 level. So people who comes, if someone who is very good at school but wants to do carpentry as a vocational course, let the young person do it. But unfortunately, our education system will steer them towards a much more general academic pathway. We need to rethink this ideology. Teachers need to rethink it, parents need to rethink it, and we need to highlight the value of vocational training. I often talk about apprenticeships and vocational courses as the quickest and shortest path to employment. Germany and Switzerland value these pathways a lot more highly. We need to rethink the system and make sure that these training courses are promoted. These manual professions need to be valued. We've got a very French system of careers guidance. Both the national government and the regions have responsibility for it. We need to make sure that young people can develop knowledge of different careers and professions in there available. In our region, we did what we called a big bang of employment. It wasn't just an exhibition with stands and things to visit, but it was focused on virtual reality and immersion experiences to show you what it's like to work in a factory. It's not like in the age of Emile Zola, but we're in what we call the Factory 4.0, a much more modern workplace. To go back to what I was saying about vocational training, in France we've not got our heads around this idea of lifelong training, whether it's for people, job seekers, but even employees. It's really important to train employees to help them to upskill. In our country, I think we provide the least training compared to other countries. There's a lot of money around. A lot of money has been put on the table, but it's not used properly, not directed properly. Benoît DERIGNY. I wanted to talk a bit about training, but also just refer back to what we were saying about labour costs. I think we need to be a bit careful in the current climate. There's a lot of uncertainty around Donald Trump's tariffs, and I'm seeing a very wait-and-see attitude from the businesses that I work with, and there might be some trade-offs, some difficult decisions made by multinational groups. So we need to be very careful with labour costs in a context where tariff barriers are going to shift again. And the question a number of big companies are asking is, where am I going to buy, where am I going to produce, where am I going to sell if they have a worldwide footprint? So the labour cost is not the only thing, but it's one of the ways the decisions are made. With respect to vocational training, I completely agree. Our system is much too complex. It's almost a science. We train 30,000 people per year. We have specialized teams in order to manage all of the different government mechanisms that operate at different levels, national, regional, and all of this to do something which is at the heart fairly simple. So we really need to simplify things. The resources are available, but the complex situation means that for employers it's pretty tricky. In a sense, for us as a business, it's a good thing, but our clients need a lot of help with it. The second issue, which I think is really fundamental, we have something in terms of employment in France. People say young people need to study for longer, but longer period of study is not a solution. The real thing is to focus on the needs of the labour markets, and the needs of the labour markets are skilled manual work, where there is a big outlook. There's a real outlook for those professions who are requiring upskilling. We need to train young people. We don't need to give them more years of training, but we need to make those professions attractive. They're interesting, they're very diverse, and they're going to see a lot of technological innovation. So I think there's a role for initial training and lifelong learning as well. I just wanted to go back to the idea that everyone is doing something, but no one's really taking care of it. I think the most relevant player in this is business. the fact that employees care about their own training and that businesses care about the training of their employees, if that were to happen, we'd have taken a big step forward. I think we talk about a tension on the labour markets in some professions. We need to pay attention to this. One of the biggest example is Deutsche Bahn, the rail service in Germany. Yes, we're talking about the German rail company. That's correct. What have they done? They need people, and they've used all of the government mechanisms, but they said, we're going to focus on our needs, our skills needs. So they've got a recruitment method, which is new. They're focusing on recruiting as widely as possible. But we see big corporations, big groups that are putting in place their own training schools. Yes, I think they're right to do that because they're focusing on their needs over time, and they realize that the best people to train the people they need are themselves. So I think one very interesting issue around Deutsche Bahn is that they've changed the profile of the people they're recruiting. What do you mean by that? They are trying to recruiting younger people. They're trying to recruit older people actually as well. They're recruiting people through inclusion and diversity initiatives because they're interested in the people they're recruiting, not necessarily people who've had a long-term training. They're interested in the people, and they take care of training their new recruits for the professions and the careers they're going to follow. So I think we need to rethink training. François, should business play a role in training, in your view? Yes, I'm very clear about this issue. 15 years ago, I was the National Secretary for Vocational Training within our trade union. And I would say that over the last 15 years, I've been hearing the same song, the same refrain repeated again and again. Each new government comes in and says the same thing: training costs too much, it's a mess, we don't understand what's going on, we're going to reform it. We've had 5 reforms of vocational training, which all came from a political initiative. And what's changed? Perhaps they were starting from a good starting point. Yeah, I imagine that they might start from a good starting point, but some of the national initiatives are not always the best thing to do. With respect to vocational training, I think the most productive and constructive initiatives come from the grassroots up. I think there's a misunderstanding. We need to think about vocational training, housing and families. You might say there's nothing to do with these different subjects, but I think they've got lots to do with each other. These are all issues on a national level where people are saying, what is the objective? What is the target? Do we have economic development targets or economic competitiveness targets, or do we have a social target? And my example could apply in the same way to housing. Is the aim to look after people who need housing, who are struggling with housing, or is it about people moving from one area of France to another to go after jobs? And again, in terms of family policy, I think anyone might ask, why is the family policy funded by an employer or an employee contribution? It doesn't seem to be a big success because our birth rates are continuing to fall. So there's a real issue. This is an issue which is currently debated by trade unions and employers' federations. Well, yes, indeed, that's what the issue is. The issue we have with vocational training is that the 5 different reforms we have since 2010 have the following objectives. Firstly, to broaden out the training market. Needed to be turned into a market so that companies that provide training could have a bigger cake to share out. That was the first objective. Secondly, there was a social objective to say, well, if you've missed out on good initial training, with your vocational training rights, you can invest in a form of individual competitiveness on the labour market. Total bullshit. The only thing that works is training that is tied into jobs that are genuinely available within one's company. And that's what existed within the old-fashioned training patterns that we had. We haven't created a market. Within our trade union, we think that we when we think about vocational training, to think about economic efficiency. What do I mean by economic efficiency? What I talk about is giving someone a means to promote investment in businesses, focusing on infrastructure and people who are going to have a career development thanks to this vocational training, to create movement within our businesses and within society. Thank you. Stéphane, with respect to training, why is this a crucial issue for employment? Well, I think that in France and in most developed countries, we are moving from a model whereby there was a labour shortage to a model where there is a shortage of skilled labour. The aging process is tipping our world towards a structural shortage of skilled manual labour. So I think training and skills are really going to be at the heart of the solution that needs to be developed. Just to go back to the reforms that have been carried out in France, the personal training account is an incredible tool. I think it was an incredible tool, reform that was carried out in creating this. I consider it to be a very broad success, a public success. People really have taken hold of this tool, including the least skilled workers. 16% of the beneficiaries of this scheme have no qualification. 23% have only got a vocational training. So these categories of workers do use the scheme. The issue is the lack of coordination with other schemes, the fact that employers don't use the individual training accounts. They don't pay into it themselves in order to offer new training opportunities for their employees. The fact that in small business, business leaders don't realise the value of trainings. The training rate of employees in small businesses is often lower than in the larger businesses. Coordination between the different stakeholders is very important. I was part of the Scientific Council for Skills Investment over 5 years. There were 5 billion euros on the table. There's no lack of money. And the skills plan had a number of targets. We wanted to focus training on the people who needed it the most, young people, older people, less skilled workers. But that was a big failure. More training was carried out, but it was training for all. There was a failure in targeting. Why was it a failure? There was a lack of coordination between the national government, the job centres, the regional governments. But it was impossible to coordinate the different stakeholders in order to target the relevant populations. We failed as well to target the professions that were under pressure. We weren't able to target the right professions. I'm not a specialist in organisation and consulting, but when you have clearly defined targets, a load of money and a methodology, and it's not working, you need to open up the hood, look under the bonnet and see what's going on in terms of coordination between the different elements of the machine, the different stakeholders. There's something that isn't working in terms of organisation and coordination of the stakeholders in vocational training. It's a central issue for our economy today and tomorrow. Let me just go back to what's been said. I kind of agree with what François said when you talk about stakeholders that don't coordinate things very well. We don't talk about businesses. Businesses generally understand what they need. So the stakeholder that could use these schemes and play a role in federating people, bringing people together, it should be business. What I see with in the businesses that I'm working with is that the businesses that have the resources to do so are taking care of this issue, are doing so better and better because they are looking for solutions elsewhere. There is an issue amongst smaller and medium-sized businesses because they need to coordinate and work together because they can't do it all themselves. But in all of the systems that you are talking about, and you know better than I do, the reality that's at the centre is that the business should be at the heart of things. The business should be able to define the work they're going to need, the labour they need today, the labour they need in the future. They need to think about what they're going to do with AI. We should stop saying that AI is just going to destroy jobs. It's not true. If we're smart, we will be able to develop skills using AI if we work the right way. But let's make sure that businesses can play a catalyst role in all of these mechanisms because businesses can find solutions. So we can see that in the subject of full employment, the elephant in the room is training. So let's keep a bit of time for questions from the floor. Please take a microphone, introduce you, and ask a question. We're really asking you to ask questions rather than make comments. Let's ask the young lady in pink. Can we get a microphone to the young lady in pink, please? Thank you for giving me the floor. My name is Morgan. I'm an apprentice in recruitment, and I am getting training at Montpellier Business School. I agree with what you say. I've got another perspective on the question rather than training. We want a full employment policy, but we're seeing businesses outsourcing, and we're seeing skills and a brain drain. We're not seeing a Keynesian virtuous circle. So my question is, how can we believe in the possibility of full employment without a very deliberate public policy on a Keynesian point of view? François, let me answer you. Over the last 15 years, we have been spending the government's money on what we refer to as supply-side economics. We've been investing 2.2% of GDP in R&D, 3.5% in Germany, and 4.5% in South Korea. When we emptied out the research centres, Emmanuel Macron said, "Come to work with us." But what Macron doesn't know is that in American research centres, there's loads of French researchers because it's too precarious a profession in France. Christelle Morançais, you talked about the skills drain, the brain drain, and deindustrialization. I don't want to hear us talking about reindustrialization in France without us having to sort out the issue of tax and competitiveness, the business taxes, the issue of social security contributions, and the issue of the 35-hour working week. Once we've sorted that out, we can talk about reindustrialization. Businesses are not competitive. That's why jobs go elsewhere. I don't think that the 35-hour working week is top of the Prime Minister's priorities, but we will hear some discussions about taxes and social security charges on the 15th of July, I think. It's a very French attitude to say, oh, we're not doing very well. But when you look at the level of attractiveness of France, and we work with all types of businesses, big corporations and small businesses right across France, the thing that we come back to is that there is a high level of training, particularly higher education in France, the attractiveness of the country, because it's a nice country to live in. And so when they need to bring some of their teams in, France is an attractive place. It's not lagging behind. There are things that need to be improved, but there are lots of strengths and things that are attractive in France. Yes, sir. I think we need to go beyond ideology. What's your question? I have the following question. I've heard people talking about the value of work. I agree with the union representative. It's about the value of work, and the value of work depends on how interesting the salary, the wages are. Also, the duration of working hours. The 35-hour working week is a thing of the past. It's now 36 hours. So you need to take into account the reality of precarious, vulnerable working. We are in line with the European average today. I think the blind spot in terms of full employment is work sharing. There's an ideology around laziness and working time. There are a lot of people who work for 0 hours. There's some people working for 13 hours and would like to work more. And I think it's time to bring in a reform. It's been blocked for several years. We've created the working hours have been halved over the last century, and we've created 14 million jobs. Maybe pass on the microphone to the young lady next to you. Over to you. Good morning. Thank you very much for this panel. I'd like to ask a question to Stéphane CARCILLO. At the start, you highlighted the increase in the employment rates. However, alongside that, a lot of reform has taken place to try and reduce the rigidity of the employment market. Should the increase in employment rates take place through making work more precarious for the workers? So it's a contrast between employment rate and the quality of the work. Well, this is a real issue. In Germany, there's the initiative that's referred to as mini jobs. It created employment, but the working conditions weren't great. In UK, you have the 0 hours contracts. In the Netherlands, there's a lot of part-time working. So that all of those initiatives have happened to a lesser extent, actually, in France up till now. And what we see, actually, in France is employment hasn't become massively more precarious. Temporary contracts and part-time working has remained relatively constant. There are increasing numbers of very short-term contracts. The number of employment contracts of less than 1 month are going up. The overall amount of temporary contracts is reduced, and there are more permanent contracts, but there are some very, very short employment contracts which are not very attractive. So we need to find the right balance between issues that will enable us to increase the employment rate because we're meeting very short-term business needs, and the need to create career paths for people who have a fairly chaotic on-off employment record. The gentleman right at the back, you've been raising your hand and waving enthusiastically. Could you ask a question and introduce yourself? Thank you. My name is Arnaud. I'm an ex-teacher and trainer. Compared to other rich countries, people who graduate after 3 or 5 years in the university, the employment people can get doesn't pay a good salary for teachers and these types of things. So who is going to kick the system up the backside to make things moving? I think it's a simple question. It seems like it. Let me say one thing to you. We've talked a lot about the cost of labor and competitiveness. I think we need to deconstruct this concept. If the competitiveness of a country and its businesses was directly linked to the level of wages, Switzerland would be the poorest country. We can see it's not true. Competitivity is not directly related to the average level of wages. It might be the opposite of what we think. So by choosing precarious employment, by choosing to support unskilled jobs, France is heading into the wall. I think we're heading down a dead end. I think we need to fund the economy by focusing on upskilling. We need to pay our teachers better. We need to pay for economic development. We need to pay for high quality jobs, and then we'll be going in the right direction. Let me just give you a little story from our group. We work in a number of countries, and it's interesting to look at what's happening in countries that have full employment. There's 3% unemployment in Poland or in Czechia. It's useful to look at those perspectives. There are situations where wages are rising. It's a situation where people have longer-term employment contracts. More people are included in the world of work. There's greater levels of inclusion. There's a lot of benefits on the labour market, which mean that for France, it would be really great to move forward quicker towards full employment and make the changes necessary. A final point, just to go back to what the gentleman said, he's right, particularly healthcare jobs are not well enough paid, but the solution is to reduce social security contributions. For 100 euros that are paid out, 60% of it goes to the government. So we need to reduce social security contributions. There's a lot to be done. A final word. I love these macro level debates. I think part of the solution, however, is on a micro level in each business. So we need to give the businesses the opportunity to solve some of these problems. And I think the opposite is happening. So let me sum up: simplicity, pragmatism, break down some of the costly and complex system. Stéphane, any final conclusions? I think France is going to get to full employment at some stage. I'm fairly optimistic. I think we have made progress over the last few years. There have been a lot of good reforms. We've seen an increase, a clear increase in the rate of employment. Business needs and the role of businesses will create further pressure to sort the system out. So I think when we get back to growth is around 0.5, 0.6 at the moment for this year, so it's difficult to create more jobs with such little growth. But when growth comes back to the economy, I think we will end up seeing unemployment falling and an increase in the rate of employment. Thank you for this optimistic conclusion. Thank you to all of you on the panel. Thank you to the speakers and everyone who's been in the audience. We'll talk about these subjects again next year at the Rencontre EDEX. Thank you.